It's March 2024 and I'm on the ramparts of the Alcázar of Segovia, a castle so castle-like it inspired Disney. Located on the Eresma River just 70 kilometres northwest of Madrid, but separated by the Sierra de Guadarrama mountains, the city of Segovia has played an important role in the history of Castile and by extension Spain itself. With its three most important sites, the medieval castle, the last Gothic cathedral built in Europe, and the best preserved Roman aqueduct lined up across the old town, occupying a high ridge overlooking the river valley and towards the mountains. The earliest signs of settlement date back around 60,000 years, with discoveries of Neanderthal occupation sites around the river valley. In the Bronze Age, a fort was constructed on the ridge where the Alcázar now stands, which was likely enhanced when the Romans arrived. The city was likely abandoned after the Moorish invasion of Spain at the start of the 8th century, and only resettled over 300 years later following the conquest of Toledo by Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile, with settlers coming from the north of Iberia and beyond the Pyrenees. By the Middle Ages, the city found itself in an important position on key trade routes for both wool and textiles, and by the end of the Middle Ages, the city was in a golden age of the powerful cloth industry in the city. The city reached its zenith when Isabel was proclaimed Queen of Castile in the church of San Miguel on December the 13th, 1474. The economic boom of the textiles trade continued in the city through the 16th century, with Segovia reaching 27,000 inhabitants in 1594. However, over the following century, trade and the population declined. Just a century later, in 1694, the population had slumped to 8,000, and it wasn't until the late 1950s that the population finally passed that previous peak. In 1764, the Royal College of Artillery was inaugurated as the first military academy in Spain. Originally housed in the Alcázar, where its museum is still located, the academy is still based in the city, making it the oldest active military academy in the world. In 1985, the Old City, along with the Aqueduct, was added to UNESCO's list of World Heritage Sites. Construction of the aqueduct is believed to have started around the 1st century AD to bring water from the springs of the Rio Frio in the mountains 17 kilometres away to serve the city's fountains, public baths and private houses. Parts of the aqueduct were still in use up until 1973. Whilst much of the structure has been lost to time, the last and most dramatic kilometre, including the 28.5 metre high aqueduct bridge that crosses the valley before entering the city through a gap in the walls, survives and is the symbol of the city. Having flown down from the mountains, the water would first have been collected in a tank before flowing into the final part of the system. The water then passes into the sand trap. This building was used to allow the sand and other impurities in the water, such as plant material, to settle out of the water before it continued on its route. Leaving the sand trap, the aqueduct continues along the top of the wall for a short distance before the height required to keep the aqueduct at just 1% slope necessitates the use of arches to avoid creating an impenetrable wall of rock. For the next 450 metres, the aqueduct continues making minor turns to keep its course direct as the land slowly falls away beneath it, supported on a single row of 75 single arches as it makes its way towards the Plaza de Dia Sands. At the plaza, the most impressive part of the structure is revealed, as the aqueduct makes a sharp turn north towards the old city. With the land dropping away sharply beneath it, a second row of arches starts, eventually forming the tallest parts of the structure as it sails over the top of the city below, with its 44 double arches and at Old Town End 4 single arches completing the structure. The upper arches have a span of 5.1 metres each, whereas the lower arches, due to the much thicker columns, have a span around 4.5 metres each. Above the three tallest arches, there's a cartouche, which would originally have had bronze lettering stating the date and builder for the structure, but the lettering has been long lost to time. Above that is a small niche. On one side was believed to originally hold the image of Hercules, who, according to Roman legend, first founded the city. Today, the niche facing away from the city is empty, but on the city side, a statue of the Virgin of Carmen is on display. The current statue being a 2019 resin reproduction of a 500-year-old original statue, which is now in the Mint Museum. Climbing up the steps for Calle San Juan takes you up to the city walls and the point where the Roman aqueduct meets the medieval walls of the old city, and naturally, one of the best viewpoints in the whole city. Stepping behind the city walls reveals a modern additional arch, as well as those 4 final arches of the original aqueduct. From here, the water is distributed in underground channels to the various locations across the city. Heading across town, and as with any good Spanish city, the heart of the old town is the Plaza Mayor, home to the 17th century town hall. The modern Plaza Mayor was historically known as the Plaza de San Miguel, in reference to the Church of San Miguel that originally occupied part of the current square. It was here, in Plaza San Miguel, where Isabel was proclaimed Queen of Castile in 1474. Dominating the western end of the square is La Santa Iglesia Catedral de Nuestra Señora y de la Asunción y de San Frutos de Segovia, or simply the Catedral de Segovia. This is the city's second cathedral. The original 12th century Catedral de Santa Maria de Segovia was located right next to the Alcázar, but was destroyed during an armed uprising in 1520. Following that, the king ordered the construction of this new cathedral on the highest point of the city, on the site of both the old convent of Santa Clara and a part of the Jewish quarter, unsurprisingly coincidentally at the same time as the height of the persecution of the Jewish population through the Spanish Inquisition. Building work started in 1525 in the Gothic style, which was a bit of a surprise, as most of the rest of Europe had moved on to Renaissance architecture, making Segovia's cathedral the last major Gothic cathedral to be constructed in Europe. The cathedral originally had a spire, but this was destroyed by a fire caused by a lightning strike in 1614, after which the current stone tower was built instead. Works continued through much of the 17th and 18th century, with the cathedral only finally being consecrated on July the 16th, 1789. But not everything in the cathedral was newly built. The cloister is original from the old Cathedral of Santa Maria. Whilst the church was destroyed in the uprising of 1520, the cloister was spared and then moved stone by stone from its old site to its current site. Today there is access from the cloister to a number of rooms that form an unofficial museum, including a room that houses parts of the cathedral's treasury, the richly decorated chapter house, and on a floor above, the room of tapestries. You can also access the rear terrace of the cathedral, from where there are some of the best views of the tower and the rear facade of the building. "500 metres northwest of the modern-day cathedral, you reach the end of a ridge that the old city sits upon, and at the end a rocky outcrop that today is home to Alcázar de Segovia. Immediately in front of the Alcázar is the Plaza La Reina Victoria Eugenia, today a garden in front of the castle complex, but until 1520 the site of the Cathedral of Santa Maria. From here, there are also viewpoints looking along both the northern and southern flanks of the ridge that the old town sits upon, from where you can look back along the city and over to the mountains, which, in mid-March, were still snow-capped in places. Construction started on the Alcázar around 1120, and over the centuries has seen 22 Castilian and Spanish monarchs pass through its rooms, as well as countless millions of tourists. It's not known if he ever actually visited, but Walt Disney certainly used the Alcázar as inspiration for his Snow White castle that has pretty much become synonymous with the idea of a fairy tale castle. Before the building of the 12th century structure, the location was likely the site of a fortification during Roman times. Foundation stones made of the same granite ashlars as those of the aqueduct have been found on the site. During the Middle Ages, in part due to its security and proximity to royal hunting areas, the Alcázar became one of the favourite residences of the kings of Castile. The castle reached its peak during the 15th century, being involved in the complex political games that took place during the reigns of Juan, John II, 1406 to 1454, and Enrique, Henry IV, 1454 to 1474. Following Henry's death in 1474, his sister Isabel proclaimed herself queen from San Miguel Church in the city, and, a few years later, it was from the Castilian treasury in the homage tower of the Alcázar that the funds were secured to finance Christopher Columbus's first voyages to the west. From the Middle Ages, the Alcázar had occasionally served as a prison for important prisoners, but from the start of the 17th century, the castle lost most of its royal importance and became a state prison, similar to the Bastille in Paris, a role it served right up until the 1930s. Alongside its role as a prison, from 1762 onwards, the Alcázar was also home to the Royal College of Artillery, a role it held up until a devastating fire in 1862 destroyed many of the rooms of the building, and the college was forced to relocate to the convent of San Francisco, closer to the centre of modern Segovia, a location it's still housed in until today. Thankfully, engravings of the rooms had been made in 1839, which allowed for the complete and accurate restoration of the castle to its former grandeur over the following years. In 1898, the General Military Archive moved into the first floor of the castle and remains there to this day, limiting tourism visits to the rooms on the main floor and no further. Though it does allow you to walk all the way through the ground floor of the castle and out to the rear terrace, where the rocky crag the castle sits on comes to a natural point, with the castle structure above following the line of the rock that it sits on to create an almost ship's bow end to the fortification. Heading back away from the Alcázar and wrapping its way around the edge of a ridge that the city finds itself on are the old city walls of Segovia. Completing a circuit of about 2.25 kilometres around the old city, the walls rise to an average height of 9 metres and a thickness of 2.5 metres. The bulk of the walls date from the period immediately after reconquest of the city at the end of the 11th and into the 12th century, though sections may be considerably older than that, with Roman inscriptions on some of the blocks either indicating walls from the era or at least the recycling of Roman material to create the walls. A handful of the original gates in the walls survive, with perhaps the most impressive being the Puerta de San Andrés, located directly below the cathedral. The gatehouse is open to the public to look around, and you can climb up onto the top of the gate for views along the walls, as well as a walk along a small section of the old city walls and taking one of the best views of the gate itself. Located on and in the walls is the Casa del Sol, the city's former slaughterhouse, which was renovated over a 20-year period from 1986 to become the city's museum. The museum opens the topographical map of a region showing the mountains and ridges that make up the geography of this part of Castile and shows how the high ground that Segovia sits on can dominate the surrounding land. The rest of the museum is then laid out in a chronological order, starting with finds from the prehistoric era and running through the major stages in Segovia's history, from the Stone Age to Roman and on through the Reconquest and Middle Ages to the rise of industry in the region and on to the 20th century. Due to its location on the walls, the museum also has one of the best views of the Alcázar. Far below the Alcázar, on the banks of the Eresma River, sits another historic building that has been repurposed into a museum, though in this instance its original and current purposes are not that different. The Real Casa de la Moneda, or Royal Mint, was constructed on the order of Philip II in 1583 to introduce mechanisation to the production of coinage in Spain, making the building one of the oldest industrial buildings in Europe. Today the building has been repurposed as a museum dedicated to the history of coinage and the industrial heritage that helped make this building so important. Using the power of a river to turn water wheels that in turn turned the mills that first thinned sheets of metal and then stamped the coins. The original technique was developed in Augsburg in 1550 before being taken up by a number of different cities before Segovia got in on the act. In 1771, the hydraulic rollers that had been in use for almost 200 years were replaced by flywheel presses brought to Spain from France. Another technology upgrade took place in the mid-1860s when an automatic press was installed, but this lasted less than 3 years before the centralisation of all coin production in Madrid in 1869. After its role as a mint came to an end, the building was repurposed as a flour factory that operated until 1968, when the building fell into disuse. In 1989, the City Council purchased the building with the aim of restoring it, a project that took until 2012 to complete when the current Royal Mint Museum opened. Segovia Guiomar station, 7 kilometres from the centre of town, sits on the high-speed line from Madrid to north of Spain, with regular Ave and Avant services taking less than 30 minutes to make the journey to central Madrid. Buses 11 and 12 run regularly from the city centre to the station, timed to meet arrivals and departures. Alternatively, there are 2 round trips a day from Madrid to the historic station in the centre of Segovia, taking about 2 hours to make the trip. Avanza Bus, the local bus company, runs regular express coaches from Segovia to the Intercambiador del Moncloa in Madrid, taking around 90 minutes. Madrid-Barajas Airport, the home base of Iberia, is one of Europe's major hub airports with flights across the globe.